Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Bain, and I'm the Director of the Initiative on Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery here at Babson College, and I want to welcome you all today to our presentation on multinational technology brands and tackling human trafficking. And we're thrilled to welcome a great group of speakers today, and I just want to thank my co-hosts for this program in this webinar series, which I'll be telling you a bit more about: the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, the International Organization for Migration, Denton's LLP, and the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center at George Mason University here in the U.S. We're so grateful for your support and participation. This webinar is the third webinar in our series looking at new technologies, entrepreneurship, and innovation in the fight against trafficking. And we're going to be having this series up until May of this year with one webinar a month. And we're excited to be having this series to talk about the latest in technology, emerging issues with the private sector, and how we're using technology to address and combat human trafficking. So thank you for joining us today. And I want to give a very special thank you right now to our sponsor today. Our sponsor today, Denton's LLP, which is a global law firm. They're actually the largest global law firm. Their U.S. branch is located here in Washington, D.C., and also in Atlanta. And they do tremendous work related to human trafficking. They do convenings in their Washington, D.C. office, and they also do pro bono work related to human trafficking. So we're so grateful for their support and attention to this matter and the issue of human trafficking and modern slavery. And you can check out their website at www.dentons.com, and I do encourage you to see the great work that they're doing globally. I also want to thank the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center at George Mason University, and particularly Dr. Louise Shelley and Casey Crenard, who are leading the helm of the center, and they're doing tremendous work on transnational organized crime issues, anti-corruption, and issues surrounding the illicit economy, including human trafficking and modern slavery, and we're so grateful for their support for this webinar series, in addition to the previous webinar series that we've also had as well. And you can find information about their work and research and initiatives at the website listed there below at track.gmu.edu. And now what I'd like to do is tell you a bit about the Initiative on Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery here at Babson College. The initiative was started in 2013, and the idea was to bring together entrepreneurial minds, students and business leaders, corporate, NGO, and governmental partners, and human trafficking and modern slavery activists from across the globe in order to learn, network, and build innovative approaches to advancing human freedom. We're also using expertise and resources from Babson College to develop cutting-edge classroom approaches and action-oriented initiatives to activate current and next-generation business leaders in the fight against human trafficking and modern slavery. We're also developing programs for not only university students, but also secondary students. Here in the United States, we're working in area high schools to work on entrepreneurial endeavors with students so that they have a lasting impact and an early impact in the fight against trafficking. We also provide seed money for them to start their ventures and go on and become true modern-day slavery activists in the world today. So we're thrilled to be working on this. We're also part of this larger initiative called the Respect Initiative, which you're going to be hearing more about from my colleague and co-host, Livia Wagner, later in the program with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. This webinar series and other activities that are associated with it are part of the Responsible and Ethical Private Sector Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and Livia is going to be telling us more about that later in the program. I also want to introduce the International Organization for Migration, who is our other partner in this webinar series and in the Respect Initiative, and just give a brief overview of the work that you're doing. Many of you are probably familiar with them and the great work that they've been doing globally for now 65 years. So they were an intergovernmental organization established in 1951. They joined the UN system in 2016, and they include 166 member states and 8 observer states, over 10,000 staff working in over 100 countries. They have a migrant assistance division where they're looking at the protection of migrants in vulnerable situations, including victims of trafficking and other forms of exploitation. They're also assisting in voluntary return and reintegration for those migrants in vulnerable situations. In addition, they're working with governments, the United Nations, civil society organizations, and the private sector to prevent and address human and labor rights violations, including human trafficking. They're also providing protection assistance to over 85,000 victims, have been assisted since 1994. They're also working on policy development, including legal frameworks, codes of conduct, et cetera, capacity building, prevention, data collection, data analysis and research, and dialogue and cooperation. They're also creating a strong engagement with the private sector, which is really such an exciting thing, and why we're thrilled to have them as partners on this webinar series and within the RESPECT initiative. They're working with industry leaders in multiple sectors to help prevent and address exploitation of workers in supply chains, and they're creating policy development, compliance monitoring, promotion of ethical recruitment, capacity building again, guidance for the provision of effective remedies to victims of exploitation and abuse, including human trafficking and child labor, and the facilitation of dialogue and cooperation, and in addition, research. So I want to thank them again for joining us in this series, and again, they're going to be with us for the next webinars and the rest of the series. Just a few points that I just want to add before we get into our next speaker. We have had a shift in the program today. One of our speakers is not able to join us, so we're going to be going along with the program, and we'll still be having a very robust discussion with the speakers that we do have, and then we're going to be having a discussion. We are recording this, so those of you who are joining us and those of you who signed up but can't join us today, or maybe leaving early, we will be sharing this recording, and it will be a snapshot of every PowerPoint and what you see on the screen. And also we'll be verbally stating the discussion questions. So as you hear the presentations and you see the speakers presenting, if you could send in your questions to the text chat box on the right-hand side of your computer, and we'll be monitoring those and getting to those in the second part of our program today with the discussion. If you do not know how to use the text chat box, please let us know. You can send me an email at cbain, B-A-I-N, @babson.edu, and we'll get you situated to send in a question into the text chat box. So with that, I want to introduce Livia Wagner, my dear friend and colleague from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, who's going to be telling us about the great work that they're doing at the Global Initiative. Livia?
Hi, Christina. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction and for being a great partner. I will just very briefly say something about the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. The GI is a network of prominent law enforcement, governments, and development experts who are dedicated to seeking new and innovative strategies and responses to organized crime. And the GI was conceived after a series of closed-forum dialogues with senior law enforcement officials, experts from multilateral organizations, and development practitioners. And there was a call for a network of experts to develop a more strategic and a global approach to counter organized crime. So it was formally launched in September 2013, and now the network comprises more than 150 independent global and regional experts working on law enforcement, human rights, democracy, governance, and development issues, of course. Our objectives are threefold. Firstly, it's strategic. That means we want to promote more effective joined-up responses to organized crime across and also between the sectors. Second, analytical. That means we want to raise awareness and open a debate of the nature, the extent, but also the impact and the solutions of organized crime. And of course, we want to be responsive. That means we want to serve as a resource to partner with national, regional, and international players. We have here, you can see the different forms of organized crime that we are covering. I myself, I'm working on the issue of human trafficking. And some selected activities here are, like Christina mentioned already, the Respect Initiative, which is a private sector initiative to tackle human trafficking. And we will soon launch our initiative and a website for that. So, but we also do have development dialogues and as well research and publications looking at the issues of environmental crime, cybercrime, but also leading a global strategy and discussions on reinvigorating the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, for instance. Reaching out, we are reaching out to a network of think tanks, and our online blog, Analyze Organized Crime, has a distribution to more than 1,700 entities. And we have on our website a resource library of 120,000 documents that are free to download and tackle or address all issues of organized crime. And we also focus a lot on social media. That means we use a lot of our Twitter channel, Facebook, and all the other media channels that we can imagine. The Global Initiative in Human Trafficking, we have here 3 publications which are addressing human trafficking, but also the issue of smuggling of migrants, as you can see on the publication of right-hand side. All of these publications are available on our website, so just have a look. And thank you for joining us in this very exciting series of webinars.
Thank you so much, Livia. Thank you for the great work that you do and also in the global fight against transnational organized crime. It's wonderful to have you as a partner. And now I'm going to be introducing our first speaker today. And we're thrilled to be having him join us with his tremendous background. I'm going to be introducing Matt Friedman, who is the CEO of the Mekong Club, which is located in Hong Kong. And Matt has such extensive experience, I'm not even going to be able to do it justice, but he is an international human trafficking expert with more than 27 years of experience as an activist, program designer, evaluator, and manager. He's currently the Chief Executive Officer for the Mekong Club, which he's going to be telling us more about their work and outreach today, which is an organization that is focused on the private sector and has joined forces to fight human trafficking, particularly in Asia. And he also co-founded that organization, and again, he's going to be talking to us more about the great work that they're doing shortly. From 2006 to 2012, he was the regional project manager of the United Nations Interagency Project on Human Trafficking in Thailand, and it's an interagency organization, coordinating body that links the United Nations system with governments and civil society groups in China, Cambodia, LAOPR, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. Prior to this, he worked for the United States Agency for International Development in Thailand, Bangladesh, and Nepal, and he helped to establish a counter-trafficking regional training center and participated in resource mobilization and production of 2 award-winning international films about sex trafficking in India and Nepal. He is also a technical advisor to numerous governments working to stop slavery, and he's also frequently a commentator in the news and in the media on issues related to human trafficking and slavery in Southeast Asia, and he's commented on CNN, TVB, BBC, and New York Times, Reuters, and Bloomberg. He's also been invited to speak at major conferences around the world, and he is the author of 9 books on subjects ranging from human trafficking to the ancient art of Bangladesh metal casting, which Matt, I really do want to hear more about that particular book. I'm very interested in what metal casting is. That sounds really interesting. So we want to thank him for joining us today. And Matt, the floor is yours.
Okay, very good. I'm going to put my slides up. Can you see them? I'm doing it from my computer.
No, he has to go into Quick Start. Matt, if you go into Quick Start under WebEx and then select the option Share My Desktop, then we'll be able to see what you're showing us.
There you go.
Okay. And so now you see my screensaver and, okay. Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
We can. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Okay, let me begin by thanking the coordinators for this opportunity to talk about this important topic. As was indicated, I'm the CEO of the Mekong Club. The Mekong Club is an organization that basically works with the private sector, corporations, to help them to understand the vulnerability of forced labor within their supply chains, or if they're a bank, how they can work to ensure that the bank isn't working with anyone who has any kind of criminal activity, which would be money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm going to talk about over the next couple of minutes is kind of what we do at the Mekong Club as it relates to technology solutions. So to begin with, before I go into this, I just want to kind of set the stage for the situation that we have globally related to human trafficking and modern slavery. It's estimated that there's 45.8 million people in forced labor and slavery around the world. When it comes to looking at this number, about a quarter of the cases are in forced prostitution, and the rest would be in forced labor type situations. So we're talking about a lot of people who are associated with private sector type programs. The geographical coverage, I live in Asia, and about 30 million of these people who are in this situation are in my backyard here in China, Vietnam, India, and so forth. And so in this particular part of the world, we have an extreme kind of problem associated with people in these types of circumstances. When it comes to the kind of the response that has been used over the years by the United Nations, the NGOs, the corporations, and the governments, you know, there are standard interventions that have been used for a long time. Prevention, awareness-raising type of activities, legal responses to go after the bad guys and to put them out of business. You have shelters that basically offer an opportunity for victims to be kind of given an opportunity to get over whatever it is that they are dealing with, and policy. And these programs, for the most part, have been in place for about 20 years now. And they have been working all over the world. We find them in North America, Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world. But in order to put kind of this situation into perspective, to understand some of the issues that we face, I just want to give you a little bit of information about kind of what it is that we've been able to achieve in the last couple of years related to this. And then you'll understand the importance of getting more people involved in this particular issue. Last year, the number of people that were helped globally out of 45.8 million people was about 78,000. So we're helping approximately 0.2% of the victims out there, not even 1%. When it comes to the number of criminals that are put in jail, out of about 500,000, we put about 4,000 annually in jail, which is about 0.8%. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. One of the main reasons is that the profits generated from human slavery are estimated to be about 150 billion US dollars a year. The amount of money that goes into fighting is about 350 million US, or 0.23%. So you can see basically with about 10,000 people around the world trying to fight an issue that has $150 billion profit, why it is that we're not having as much impact. So what's really needed is for us to kind of go into the real world, identify corporations, faith-based groups, schools, et cetera, to get more people involved. So I want to talk about one other issue that is a major contributing factor to these low numbers, and that is the issue of low victim identification. Actually, if you can't find the victims, you're not going to be able to address their needs, and so victim identification becomes an important part of the process. So I'm going to give you an example in Thailand. in Thailand, you have authorities who come in contact with potential victims of human trafficking, but they face an issue because they can't communicate with them. So what we see is the potential victims are in front of the authorities and they're kind of talking to them, but they're not able to kind of communicate because they don't even know where they come from or what language it is. The authorities can't identify where migrants are coming from. There's confusion and embarrassment. We all know that when we're in a situation where somebody's trying to talk to us in another language, we get confused, we get embarrassed, and we want to walk away from the situation. And this is what often happens with the authorities. So information can't be transmitted from these people to say, okay, well, I have an issue or a problem. So the authorities leave, and as a result of this situation, the victims remain victims. And so there's a missed opportunity there. So in order to address this issue, some type of immediate translation mechanism is needed in order to allow for the authorities to determine whether or not there's a problem or not. Hence, the use of a smartphone. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about just quickly is kind of an app that the Mekong Club has been developing with some NGOs and authorities in Thailand to allow for Thai officials to be able to communicate with these people who they haven't been able to communicate with in the past to perhaps solve this issue. So the way it works is basically, first of all, you need to have some migrants. So let's say some authorities are driving along and there's a truck and they stop the truck and there are these people on the truck and they're trying to communicate with them. The first thing they do is they take out a smartphone that has this particular app on it. And what the app does is it offers you 3 options of a short survey, medium, or a long one. So the survey approach they're going to use initially is the short version. It only has 6 questions. Okay, and so what they do is after they hit that button is you will see flags that designate different countries. And they take the phone and they gesture towards one of the migrants to get them to point to the flag that represents the country that they come from. In this particular case, you see Myanmar is being selected. Once that happens, a video with somebody who speaks Burmese will come on and say, we're the authorities. We are here to see whether or not there's any kind of an issue with you. If there is, we're here to help you. If not, then fine. So we are going to ask you a series of questions. If the answer to the question is yes, press green, no, press red. And so a series of questions are asked. Are you here against your will? Are you in trouble? Do you need help? The way the app works is if they hear a question and answer green even once, then you know that there's some kind of an issue or a problem associated with this particular individual. So then you can basically move in the direction of kind of looking at what the other answers are. There's a checklist at the end. You can put a GPS code in, take some photographs, put additional information to identify a particular report, and then what you're able to do is actually help the victims. And so they could be taken over to the NGO that you're working with or the police station to be able to offer them whatever services that they may need. Now, prior to this type of approach, once again, lots of contacts would take place with potential migrants, but it wouldn't move forward because of this lack of communication. Now, the good news about this app is it's very simple to use, and through trials that we've done in Thailand, we've been able to increase victim identification by about 30%. The other thing is once the app is developed, it's very cost effective because you give it over to the organizations on an iPhone or on an Android phone, and it's very easy to use, and they can use it over and over again. I guess the difficulties that we've faced in this is that pro bono support to help us to pull this together has been very slow and inefficient, partly because, you know, pro bono support is on somebody else's schedule. And whenever a change is needed, it often takes us a long time to be able to make those kind of changes. So this is an example of IT application that helps to address a developmental issue. The second project that I want to quickly talk about is very similar to the first one in that it uses technology to try to collect information from people who are in potentially difficult circumstances. In this particular case, in the work that we do, we often work with auditors who go into factories to find out whether or not there are issues with workers. The auditor will go in, initially talk to the management, maybe walk around the factory, and if they're lucky, they have an opportunity to talk to the staff that are there, but there are often a certain number of constraints that exist when it comes to working with these staff. For example, if they're trying to do an interview and the floor manager is standing nearby, many of them are not honest in their answers because they don't want to get in trouble. Oftentimes, questions are asked in a language that is different from what it is that they know or understand, and workers need to feel that the responses that they will provide are confidential and anonymous. And so basically what we were trying to do is to develop a tool that would allow this to happen. So using the same basic format, but in this particular case, a tablet, what we have is a room that is set aside, the tablet's put in place, and then about 50 kind of migrant employees would be asked to go into the room and press the flag from the country that they come from. The way it works is, in this particular case, let's say that Burmese is selected. What you would have is, once again, a video showing a Burmese person talking, and in this particular case, there would be no text here, but I'm showing the type of text that would be stated. The person says, we're part of the audit team. We are here to see if we can collect some information from you. If the answer to the question is yes, press green, no, press red. This is confidential. Your employer will not know what it is that you say, et cetera, et cetera. So then the questions start to happen. In this particular case, there's a 13-question questionnaire. First question would be, are you happy with your job in the factory, yes or no? And the other types of questions you can see are listed here. So they mix questions that perhaps are easy to answer with some that are a little bit more sensitive. Did you pay a recruiter agent to find the job? Were your documents confiscated, et cetera, et cetera? After this information is put in to the questionnaire, it's tabulated at the end, but there is no individual input from anyone. It's tabulated as a group, so nobody knows who said what. And so this questionnaire, the goal of this approach is to allow for the questions to be answered in such a way that you can get a general sense of what's happening in the factory without having the constraints of standing by and collecting information with the manager of the factory being nearby. So it would allow for the possibility of confidentiality, and it would also allow for the individuals to perhaps give their information over. This particular approach is in the process of being built now, and it will be tested within the next 4 to 6 months, hopefully within some factory situations. So this offers kind of an overview of the types of things that basically technology can be used for to address very practical issues related to human slavery and human trafficking in Asia. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matt, for your comments and your work in Asia and beyond. What you're doing is really extraordinary, and I think it shows particularly how you're using technology and working with multinational brands to address human trafficking and modern slavery, and we really look forward to hearing more from you in the discussion. I know we're going to have some questions for you about the work that you're doing, so thank you for that. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Greg Clark, who is the Senior Program Manager and Content Manager of PhotoDNA Cloud Service, for PhotoDNA and Cloud Service at Microsoft. And he is a seasoned technology professional with nearly 2 decades of experience bringing products to market across numerous industries, ranging from government solutions to corporate travel and expense management services. He joined Microsoft in 2011 and has spent the last 5 years in the online safety space developing solutions to be used both inside Microsoft as well as ones that are publicly available, like Content Moderator and PhotoDNA Cloud Service, which he's going to tell us about today. In his personal time, he is also actively engaged with a number of NGOs working to end sex trafficking. He has graduate degrees from the Institut d'études politiques, Paris, and Oxford University and Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. He is also a fellow at the Columbia Center for Sustainable Investment and the Center for Social Responsibility in Mining at Queensland University in Australia. And we're thrilled to welcome Greg today. And Greg, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christina. And just a quick comment: those last two bullets actually aren't from me, so those might have been pulled off of some social media for a different Greg Clark. But I wish those were my credentials. Very good. And thanks, Matthew, as well, for such a great the work that you do and a great lead-in. I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing at Microsoft. And particularly, we'll have a little bit of a conversation around Microsoft's PhotoDNA Cloud service. But to jump into that, I really wanted to start with Microsoft's approach to online safety. And Microsoft has a longstanding commitment to protecting children, and indeed all individuals, as they live out their digital lives. Microsoft approaches online safety and child protection with 4 key areas in mind: technology, self-governance, awareness, and education, and partnership. First and foremost, Microsoft is a technology company. We have a responsibility to create software, devices, and services that have safety features, functionality, and considerations built in from the outset. In addition, we devise and implement internal online safety policies, standards, and procedures that extend beyond pure legal requirements in an effort to self-govern product development operations. So that's our self-governance. We have a lot of different processes and procedures that our products go through to ensure that we're adhering to our goal of online safety. We also have a responsibility to stay abreast of the risks that individuals and families may face online. We alert consumers to such developments and educate them about how we can help protect themselves and their families. Perhaps most importantly, we embrace a multi-stakeholder model and partner with others, because no one entity or organization can successfully tackle these significant issues alone. So things like partnering with different NGOs around the world, as well as other technology companies, because this isn't a Microsoft-specific responsibility, or Microsoft alone. We can't solve some of these problems as they come online. And as technology companies, we have a responsibility, because a lot of technology is used in trafficking and human trafficking, and so we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to prevent that on the technology front. So specifically around the problem around PhotoDNA, so when Microsoft looks at this problem, we know that over 1.8 billion images are uploaded and shared online every single day. And so finding child sexual abuse images is like finding a needle in a haystack, literally. When we think about what the impact of these images have on the victims, when we've talked to victims and we've worked with NCMEC to give us some information around what this means to them, and their feeling is that every time one of these images shows up, they're being re-victimized. And so it was really something that Microsoft felt as a duty to try and figure out how do we stop the distribution of this type of images and protect our business, as well as allow other companies to protect their businesses. So a little history. In 2009, Microsoft partnered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, and Dartmouth College to develop PhotoDNA. And we worked with some researchers there to come up with a solution that allowed us to detect this type of image, or these types of images, without actually having the content and to have to continue to have the content or allow the content to be distributed across our platforms. And so we worked with their research teams, our research teams, and the Dartmouth research teams worked together, and we came up with a solution. And shortly thereafter, Microsoft donated that technology to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which would allow other companies to license the technology, like Facebook and Twitter. Those are companies that have that license the technology as well. And so we've really created an industry standard when it comes to how do you identify known illegal content and protect and keep it off of your networks and your systems. In 2015, we did an analysis of the companies that had been licensing the product, and tried to understand what we were seeing wasn't as high of adoption as we had hoped. And we, through our analysis, we understood that the adoption and the implementation of the product was actually not that easy. And so with the onset of, things like the cloud and REST APIs and the different technologies that had been coming into play in the recent years, we decided that we needed to bring PhotoDNA into that era. And so we launched the PhotoDNA Cloud Service as well as Content Moderator to make it easier for companies to adopt the technology, taking the kind of deployment time down from around 3 months to less than 3 weeks in some instances. So we've seen a really good uptick in other companies being able to adopt the technology and to take advantage of the capability since then. And so we wanted to continue our investment. One of the other main advantages of the bringing customers into a cloud service is this ability to share hashes. And so PhotoDNA really runs on this idea of a digital hash or a fingerprint, if you will. And those hashes are created and distributed by different NGOs and organizations. And so the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had been distributing a list of hashes to the companies that had licensed PhotoDNA, and it was a list of known illegal content within the U.S. And knowing that there was other organizations that were also creating hashes, we wanted to make sure that we could grow our hash database so that we could have a bigger impact. And so in 2016, Microsoft took a lot of initiative to go out and get hashes from different organizations and set up all the licensing and legal requirements so that we could share those as part of the PhotoDNA Cloud Service. So now companies that are approved and registered to use the cloud service can take advantage and opt into those different hash data sets. So we've done a massive scale out of the hashes that we have. We continue to do that. We'll continue to do that. There's additional organizations, additional hashes that we want to be able to enable for our customers. The other thing that we did in 2016 is, in order to grow the footprint of PhotoDNA, is we partnered with the Internet Watch Foundation, or IWF, out of Europe to enable their members to use the cloud service with the IWF hashes. And so that really extended the ability for more companies to be able to take advantage of the detection capabilities that PhotoDNA offer. And so what do we have on the docket for 2017? So in 2017, one of the things that we want to do is actually make it easier and improve the performance of the capabilities. So some areas that some customers have expressed a need is to make it simpler for them to put on or to send us hashes or send us content. And so we're working on some things around bringing more of the compute power to into the customer's hands of the cloud service so that they can increase their transaction levels and increase the amount of transactions that they're sending to us. We're going to continue, like I said, we're going to continue to increase the size of the hash database as well, and that way we can have a bigger disruption in the distribution of this terrible content. And with that, I think that was my last slide. So I'll turn it back over to Christina.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you for your comments and the great work that you're doing. And I have fixed your bio slide now. I apologize for that. We had a transfer of slides that didn't come out right. So your bio is now corrected, and we'll be using it for the discussion portion. I think what you've just talked about and what you've displayed is just a great example of historically how a multinational technology brand has engaged in this issue and where you're going in the future, and the work that you're doing is truly saving lives. So thank you for presenting today. So Greg was our last speaker because of our shift in program. So what we're going to do is go early now to our discussion portion. And thank you to those who have sent in their questions already to the text chat box. Do send it in. We will receive it. We've had some just questions about sending it to the host versus sending it to the presenters. You can do either. We'll see it. Either way, sending it to the host will go directly to me. Otherwise, we will still get your questions as well. So continue to send those to us, and we'll get them during the Q&A portion. And again, you know, if you want to have it go to any speaker or if you want to have it go to all speakers, just let us know too. So the first question we have, it goes to Matt, and it's regarding the app. And there's a few questions surrounding that about what were the main examples of success you've seen, maybe some of the difficulties that you've encountered by using the app, and also what improvement could be made in the approach of victims and data collection.
Thank you for that question. The biggest difficulty that we had is that as an NGO, we were relying on pro bono support to help us to develop this type of app. And so we had an organization, Mother Apps, that agreed to help us with the build. They took all the parameters. They did the first draft. We then tested it. They did the second draft. The difficulty we faced, though, is it just took forever because they were busy with many other projects and we were always third or fourth on the list. Once the app was developed, another interesting kind of negative outcome was that we went to some government officials who used it and then approached them after they had tested it, and they said, well, we don't like the app. And then we said, well, why not? And they said, well, because it works. And then we said, okay, well, that's what it's supposed to do. And then they said, well, that just adds a lot of additional work to us. And so it was quite interesting to have in almost a negative statement, a positive endorsement that what we were doing was actually making a difference. The individuals that used it from the NGOs found it to be quite useful because they were often in the field trying to reach people and they couldn't communicate with them. And this is an issue that we find among many of the NGOs. It's just being able to communicate with people who might be in difficult circumstances. And so what we found is that for the short 6-question survey, they would stand there and the migrant person would basically answer right away. But when we had the 21-question sample, the person that they were presenting it to often walked away and sat down and started doing the question by themselves because they were very interested in kind of what the phone was asking them to talk about because this was an issue that was quite important to them. So having a video that visually shows an individual talking in their own language seems to develop a certain amount of trust that's quite useful. Now, when it comes to kind of the next steps and where we're going to go from here, from the various trials that we have done, we learned that there were changes that needed to be done in the app, but the difficulty with the approach that we took was that we built an app that was specifically on Android phone that whenever it needed to be changed required a lot of pain and suffering. And so with the rebuild, and we're working with the United Nations University on this, we're hoping to fix that by allowing for this to be web-based so that we can easily add modules and take modules away. Now, you know, I think that the potential for technology to be able to address issues related to forced labor is just at the beginning stages. I think there are many other uses of phones. Everyone has a phone. Everyone knows how to use it. And so we're hopeful that now that we're in the process of making these changes, that we'll be able to come up with an approach that could be used by law enforcement, by the NGOs, by the government in a way that would significantly increase victim identification.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that response, and again, for the great work that you're doing with the app. We really look forward to hearing more about it, and I know we have a few more questions on it, which we'll get to later. And now I want to turn to Greg. We have a question that also discusses a bit about Matt's presentation. What are you doing in terms of the work that Microsoft is currently engaged in Asia? Do you have any particular initiatives that are going on in Asia right now that you could discuss with the audience?
Yeah, so in terms of around human trafficking and other things that we're doing in Asia, we don't have anything that we would specifically any things that we specifically discuss, but we do. One of the things I did want to mention is that, and this could be relevant to Matthew as well. Microsoft has what we call our 1-week hackathon, and we're encouraged to work with different organizations and NGOs, and it's really an opportunity for people at Microsoft to kind of work on things that they're passionate about, and that's one of the areas that I spend time on in my my personal time, where I was talking about and engaged with a number of NGOs to work in sex trafficking. So I've worked on a number of different hackathons to work with these organizations to help them from a technology perspective, because that's the things that I'm able to contribute. I've got technology experience, and so it sounds like Matthew's also worked with some different organizations to get some technology, but that's one of the areas that Microsoft definitely encourages our employees to do, is to engage directly with NGOs, and if they're passionate about those things, leverage our channel. We also have a channel called The Garage, or a program called The Garage, where we work with different NGOs, and we have we call it a Tech for Good channel or program as well. So those are a couple different areas that I can talk about from a public perspective. And then there was also a question that looked like it was sent to me privately around what Microsoft's doing to ensure that technologies don't end up being misused or in the wrong hands. And so, to address that question, the best answer I can give you is that we definitely do things to ensure that anything that's illegally being when our technologies are being illegally distributed, or people are our supply chain is compromised, in some of the ways that even Matthew was talking about. We work to make sure that those types of scenarios aren't those types of people aren't using Microsoft's technologies or distributing them specifically. When it comes to actually the use of the technologies, we don't really have a way to understand that the person using this device is a human trafficker. So those are certainly, Microsoft obviously takes privacy very importantly, and so we wouldn't have any of that really visibility into those types of uses. But so we look at it in other ways, like certainly with PhotoDNA and some of the other ways that we can actually leverage technology to do good, so that we can combat the bad that's happening in with technology as well. Did that answer the question?
That's great. Thank you so much, Greg, for that response. So now I want to turn it back to Matt, and I think that this is somewhat of a thematic question too, about how are you engaging businesses in your work and encouraging their use of the auditing app? I think it's also a question too about, since the theme today is about multinational brands technology brands tackling human trafficking, are there a few comments that you could give about maybe how you do engage with the major multinational technology brands, possibly, like Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, et cetera, and maybe even, some of the social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, and how are they playing a role possibly in the work that you're doing, or maybe is that something that's the next step with the work that you're doing in Asia?
Very good question. Let me begin with a shout out for Microsoft. When I was working for the United Nations in Bangkok 10 years ago, Microsoft was one of the first organizations that stepped up and got actively involved. They were in Asia. They had programs in Cambodia, I think in India as well. And, it demonstrated that corporations felt strongly that this issue was something that needed to be addressed not only by the NGO world, but with corporations getting involved as well. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about the Mekong Club. The Mekong Club is made up of private companies that basically understand that the NGO world can't address this issue by itself. As I indicated, 0.2% of the victims around the world are being helped. So the idea is that if we can identify ways of incentivizing corporations to get more involved, perhaps we could get them not only to address this from the business risk element, but also to have them feel comfortable enough to step up and be involved in offering leadership. Now, I say this because, working for the NGO world and the UN world, we have very talented people, but we also lack the funds to be able to get highly qualified IT-type individuals that could work directly with us. And so as a result of that, we don't have access to the state-of-the-art, cutting-edge type of technology. And so finding ways of getting the corporate sector to step up and be a part of helping us to develop tools, processes, procedures to use the cloud technology that exists, to be able to link up NGOs and collaborative networks, to be able to collect information and analyze it, all of the various things that become so much a part of what the business world does on a regular basis, to be able to tap into some of that. And just one other point related to that is that, I was looking at some statistics on the internet related to the Fortune 500 companies. Their revenues last year was something like $31 trillion. The amount of money that goes into managing the governments around the world is about 21 trillion. So you're really dealing with corporations that are like countries. They're huge, they have tremendous talent, they have lots of people that have immense skills. Imagine if we were able to apply that in a way that would allow for the counter-trafficking movement to have access to some of that. We would be much further along, and we're beginning to see that now. So when it comes to kind of the app development process, the way the Mekong Club works is we have 4 working groups, banking and finance, manufacturing, retail, and hospitality. And we have association members that come together 4 times a year to basically sit down, talk about what the gaps are, what's needed, and then in between those meetings, the Mekong Club uses our resources to bring in the technical prowess that we can to be able to develop the tools that are needed. So the app that I mentioned related to the audits was an idea that came from a couple of our manufacturing members. It's in the process of being designed now. It hasn't been put into play. And so, it's the type of thing that one of these hackathons or marathon build type things would be very, very helpful to us, because if we were able to get 10 really technically sound people in a room for a build like this, it could be done in 48 hours very easily and then applied very easily as well. So basically finding a better way of creating a marriage between the corporate sector and the NGO sector, I think, is really going to be the solution to allow us to have the big wins, so that we can get to 1% or 5% or 10% of the victims around the world being helped.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that response. That was fantastic. And I think to follow up on, we're getting some really interesting regional questions from the audience, especially because I think some of the work that we're discussing is very, very unique. And so this is a question that's now come in, and it's really for both Greg and Matt, about what is the scope of the work that you're seeing being done like this in terms of engaging the private sector, organizations like the Mekong Club that exist in Latin America. And also for Greg, what are the initiatives that you're seeing or you're working with in Latin America in terms of Microsoft and emerging technologies? So maybe Greg, do you want to go first, and then Matt, if you could chime in, that would be great.
Yeah, and when it comes specifically around Latin America, and I know I don't have any good numbers for you in terms of what we're doing there with different NGOs. What I do know is, to comment a little bit around what Microsoft's doing in the space of working with different NGOs is we have a philanthropy organization that has really a big grant capability. And so one of the things that we do is we work with a number of different organizations around the world to provide them with grants and funding that will help them from a technology perspective achieve their goals. You know, one of the things that Ashton Kutcher talked about when he spoke in front of Congress this month was, you know, some of the kind of low-hanging fruit when it comes to you know, helping organizations that are passionate about these types of things is really from a process and just a back office type scenario. So, you know, things around, you know, can they use some Office 365 or some other technologies that will help them save time, you know, doing kind of the back office or the work that is required from it, whether it be a tax reporting or whatever other efforts. Can they save time and money there so that they can actually focus on the work that's really important and passionate to them, and that's as part of their mission and their charter. And so that's one area that Microsoft does, and that's on a global basis. You know, we try to make sure that we work with NGOs that are having an impact and try to provide them with the resources that they need that can help them make a bigger difference.
Thank you, Greg. And Matt, do you want to add anything to that about work you're seeing in Latin America, and if you see anything like the Mekong Club emerging?
Well, let me just talk a little bit about the NGO sector in general. I mean, I spent 27 years kind of working within the UN and the NGO world, so I very much come from that world. Working with the private sector is kind of a completely new area, and you almost have to be retooled in order to be able to engage. And to just give you an example, I went to make a presentation in Hong Kong to some high-level officials. I walked into the room with my 78 slides. I finished 4 of them, and then they asked me if I was nearly done. You know, the NGO world just looks at the world differently. They approach it, the problems differently. But in many ways, these differences can be extremely complementary. You know, one of the things that we do a lot of work with the NGOs on is helping them to understand that while there is a place for naming and shaming, if that's the only thing that NGOs do, then to a certain extent what they're doing is closing access to corporations. And so, you know, perhaps a new way of looking at the relationship between corporations and NGOs is to find a way of collaborating and cooperating. I personally feel that when you can get corporations and the NGOs to work together, you get so much more mileage because the corporations have resources, they have talent, they have all kinds of innovation that would allow the NGO world to greatly benefit from this. And so a lot of what we do with the NGOs is to bring them in contact with the private sector so that they are able to perhaps learn from them, to understand them, and then perhaps engage in a way that would allow for a united front to take place. It's based on the basic premise that if we could get corporations, governments, NGOs, faith-based groups, students, everybody working together in unison through kind of an abolitionist movement, we would then be able to perhaps have a much bigger impact. And kind of tapping into the great innovative skills of organizations like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, technology giants that are out there, if they were able to apply even 1% of their resources to be able to address this, we would have huge kind of inroads into being able to address these types of problems. So this unity and this collaboration is an essential part of the direction we all need to go in order to make a real difference.
Thank you so much, Matt. That's great. And I also want to add, too, that I think you're exactly right that, you know, we still are working to further engage the private sector in this. And that was one of the reasons that we started this work at Babson College and the Global Initiative and I started the Respect Initiative, and we're going to be moving forward to expand it. And because of the conversations and the robust discussions that we've had on particularly these webinar series, and this is our third webinar series that we've done related to the private sector, it's just come out that we really have that much farther to go. And we hope to be working also with our Latin American colleagues on the Respect Initiative and have some type of focus in that region as well. So thank you for being a trailblazer in Asia. We're so excited to see what you're going to do next. So now we have some questions coming in that are specific to both the work that Matt and Greg are doing, and I want to go back to Greg. We have a question coming in about specifically the PhotoDNA technology, and the question is this the new version of the Innocent Images project from years ago, and what is the coordination with law enforcement given the nature of the images that you're obtaining?
Yeah, I hadn't actually heard that title before, so I'm not sure. I haven't come across that. I started at Microsoft, in 2011, so it could have been before my time. So in terms of the images, so we technically don't actually ever obtain any of the illegal images. So there's no coordination with law enforcement necessary. That was one of the main requirements of building the technology of PhotoDNA was it's illegal to actually have the images. So they're considered, those are crime scene evidence. So what we needed to be able to do was have a capability that allowed us to, identify known illegal content without actually having the illegal content, and have some robustness around that content changing over time and still be able to match it. And so that's what PhotoDNA does. And so we work with different NGOs like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to get the the hashes or fingerprints of those images that can't be reverse engineered. So they're one-way hashes. You can't take the hash and turn it into an image. So that's how we work through that process.
Thank you, Greg. And I also want to say that Microsoft is also contributing in other ways in this space, and I've been involved with convenings with Microsoft related to faculty and researchers who are coming more from a social science perspective, going to the Microsoft headquarters in Redmond here in the U.S. and talking about these issues related to human trafficking and exploitation. And I really want to commend Microsoft for the great work that they've done in terms of taking a step up and convening social science researchers as opposed to computer science researchers, and then convening us all together, having the computer scientists meet with the social scientists and having these discussions about how we can work together. And that was something that I found really unique in the field. This was about 5 or 6 years ago, and to have that conversation I think was really extraordinary. In addition, I also know Microsoft is funding research projects and working on looking at how technology is a facilitator and can also be used for good in terms of combating human trafficking and what that looks like. So again, hats off to Microsoft for having all of these initiatives and working on them. So now I want to go back to Matt. We're getting a bunch of questions about the app, and I think that the audience is really, really interested in learning more too about maybe just a bit more you could say about the journey of the app and how did you test it, and how did it come together to create a funding pool? Were you able to work with maybe auditing companies to help design it? I think there's a few questions just about the process of how the app came together from start to finish. So anything that you could share. I know we also have some budding entrepreneurs and some students who are on the line who are really interested in getting involved in this space and looking at technology. So I think this would be a great resource to them to hear about how you did this.
Thank you very much for that question. Let me start with the Thailand app first. I was working for the United Nations for an interagency project, and what we were finding is that as we were collecting information related to fishing activities and forced labor on fishing boats, we would approach the Thai government and we weren't really getting much of a reaction. And I think part of it is that the Thai government feels like whenever you talk about an issue like fishing, it potentially has the potential to cause them to lose face, and as a result, they feel like this could hurt their socioeconomic situation, et cetera, et cetera. So we happened to mention to the Malaysian government the fact that we were having this difficulty, and they said, well, you know, for the most part, you know, if we go out and we kind of do the regular monitoring of fishing boats, if we had some tool that would allow us to communicate with the people on the boats, perhaps we could help to address this issue. We have no problem going onto the boats, and if we identify something, then we'll address it. So the initial idea for the app came through discussions that we had with the Malaysian government, whereby they basically said, develop a tool that would allow us, when we go onto these boats, to communicate with the staff, and if we find that forced labor takes place, the boat is brought to port, and it doesn't go back to the captains in Thailand. And if we were able to do something like that, we would perhaps be able to confiscate 8 or 10 or 15 boats. That would send a really strong message back to the Thai boat owners that if you have slavery on your boat, this potentially could result in a $750,000 US asset being lost, and perhaps that would help to reduce a lot of the issues related to the fishing industry. So the genesis of this was basically that. Now, gradually over time, which is often the case in countries that you work in Asia, people we were working with changed, and as a result of it, we no longer had access to government people in Malaysia, but we had already started the build at that time, and so we developed the build with the expectation that perhaps we could just go to Thai NGOs and work with them. So once we had our first draft of this, or design, we went to Thailand, we showed it to people, and we came to realize that there were some mistakes in the translation of the various videos. And as a result of that, we had to make changes. So we went back to the app development people, and they went ahead and did that. The second version was tested among government officials and some NGO workers, and the results of that also resulted in some suggested changes. Now, the difficulty with kind of translating topics like forced labor and slavery into other languages is that if you don't get the language just right, you can misinterpret what it is that's being said. And so much of what we needed to do was to make sure that our translations were right. And so we went and we tested this over a 6-month period. We collected the information. We were able to identify that what we had was basically a tool that was effective in identifying people, but additional changes need to be made. And we're in the process of making those changes now. When it came to the audit app, what happens is we sit down with kind of brands and companies, and they're often talking about the constraints that they face when it comes to doing audits. The fact that, you know, it's very difficult to really get deep into a company to see what's happening. It's very difficult to get the honest answers from people. It's very difficult to kind of reach the workforce. And so through a brainstorming session, a number of people said, okay, well, this is what we think would be the solution. An anonymous tool that allows for a person to listen to the questions in a separate room and allow them to basically be able to answer in an anonymous way. And so based on that assumption, we're in the process of trying to identify partners to help us to actually do the build. So we've done the proposal, we've pulled together the rationale and the reasons why we think this is going to be useful. We just have to go forward now and actually develop the tool itself.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for that comment and again, the work that you're doing. I think that's so helpful to hear how that process went, again, especially for the students who are on the call. I also want to now go to Greg again. We did have a question about just a bit more specifics about how the PhotoDNA technology works. And there's a question about how does facial recognition play into it, if at all? Is that something that you're able to detect with it? And maybe if there's just a way you could explain to the audience, you know, how exactly the technology works in terms of, you know, from start to finish, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't disclose too many details around how the technology works, but I can comment on the facial recognition. So it is a little bit confusing with, you know, facial recognition coming out, you know, after PhotoDNA had been something, and it's pretty popular nowadays. But PhotoDNA doesn't actually use anything around the face, and so essentially, PhotoDNA it actually looks at the individual pixels of the image and does comparisons of those to incoming images, and so, or it creates a hash out of those pixels, and then it compares the hashes. And so that's why we get some robustness around, you know, the content and changes to the content, and so we can continue to match even when the image has been changed, because we're not looking at, you know, other types of data, and we're not also it's not really machine learned type of program either. So it's really an algorithm that does the matching, and so that's how that works. And yeah, so I think that's how I'd comment on that.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for explaining what you could. I know that, you know, this is all evolving too. So thank you for sharing what you could with how this is working. It's such a great tool, and I know that the audience is really excited to hear about it. So now I have a question for both of you coming in about what do you think is really the next stage, whether it's for multinational technology brands, or just technology in general in terms of where we're going to be going to the field next in terms of addressing this crime. When I went to the conversation at Microsoft back in 2012, it was apparent that, you know, we were asking the questions about our traffickers ahead of us in the technology, and do we need to catch up? And I think that we ask this question, you know, constantly. I think we obviously, you know, need to have more research done on it. But what is both of your opinions in terms of where we need to head next? You're both working on groundbreaking technological solutions, and where do you see the field in general headed with this? And also, again, with the idea of multinational corporations also being involved. So, Matt, do you want to try to answer that question first?
Sure. Okay, you know, I think that there's often this kind of discourse that talks about what is the new cutting edge, what's the new technology that's really going to allow us to be able to make a difference, et cetera, et cetera. And while I consider that to be important, I also feel like at the same time, what we really need the private sector to help us with is more kind of basic type stuff. For example, across the world, data collection and analysis related to human trafficking is at its nascent stage. We just don't have mechanisms to collect, to store, to analyze, and then to use that as a means of really being able to make a difference. Another thing is there's all types of kind of private sector approaches that help to allow for collaboration among, say, multinational companies to come together and work together that if applied to the NGO world would add great value. So how do you develop perhaps a cloud that would allow for the NGOs and the UN to be able to share information, to exchange data related to trafficking trends and so forth, or allowing law enforcement to be able to do some of that? We see bits and starts of that here in Asia, but if we were able to really kind of get a consortium of large tech organizations together with some communications organizations, sit down, develop a comprehensive plan, work together with the NGOs, and then put something like this in place, we would really be setting up a foundation that would allow for significant improvements to take place. I feel like within the NGO and the UN world, we reach a certain potential capacity but not nearly as much as if we were to have some of the tools that are available in the private sector. So I really feel like if there was a way for us to improve the environment in this space to allow corporations to feel more comfortable to get involved in addressing this, and then to kind of bring a consortium of these groups together to address some of these systemic problems, we would really be able to have a major impact take place here in Asia.
Thank you, Matt. Greg, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Matt's saying there. I think you know, data sharing is a big issue in some of the organizations that I've seen. I think the other areas that can definitely have an impact are going to be, and specifically around sex trafficking is where I've spent some time and talked to some different organizations. But it's part of its education. So if in the U.S., you know, there's not a concerted effort to have law enforcement or police officers even investigate sex trafficking crimes, and actually in a lot of areas they arrest the victims and not the perpetrators. And so I think we've got to have the people that are part of communities that, you know, where this type of stuff is happening, and it's likely happening in every community. I know it happens, you know, in the Seattle area, you know, right in our backyard. And we have some police departments that don't even have detectives and resources that are dedicated to preventing or stopping this. It comes in, you know, different types of, you know, into some other organizations in their police department. So some police departments are actually taking an effort and having dedicated resources to this. So they're starting to make a bigger impact. So there's that part of it. So I think the communities need to demand this type of thing to be a top issue for you know their tax dollars when they're funding their police departments, not just crime and you know people breaking, entering, and those kinds of things. The other area I think is on the sex trafficking side is actually education for the perpetrators. So when they interview, you know, people that solicit sex, in a lot of cases, they actually think and they're convinced that they're doing something good. They're actually providing money to the victims, and so I think those are, you know, changes that we have to make to society in general to make, you know, people that are participating in this realize that the vast majority of people that are victims don't want to be there, and they're being coerced to be in those situations. So I think education is going to be a big part of it. And then I think, you know, private sector partnering with the NGOs to help from you know, in Microsoft's case, from a technology perspective, you know, I think that's a big opportunity to help them, you know, operationalize some of the processes that they're doing, so that they can, you know, save time and money and stretch the dollars that they get even further. So I think there's, you know, definitely a lot of opportunity ahead, and you know, I think we're seeing more and more of those partnerships come to fruition, but there's more road to go.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you for your feedback on that, and again for both of you sharing your vision for where you think this is headed. I just want to remind the audience that as we begin to wrap up, we do have some more questions in the question, okay, but we can still fit in a few more. So if you want to send in your questions to the text chat box, please do so before we begin closing comments shortly. So do send your questions into the text chat box, and we'll get to them. So I have a question for Matt. Given that we're Babson College and we do focus on something called entrepreneurship here, I'm obligated to ask the question, especially for the students on the call and some of our faculty, about how you made the transition from being working at the UN and working in government and in another space to becoming really an entrepreneur and co-founding your organization. What inspired you? How did you start that process? Because I think, you know, talking to the number of students and business students that I work with, I think sometimes it can be daunting to think about how to fit in this space. because there's so many tentacles to the human trafficking problem. And now we're beginning to have the conversation in more robustly in the past 5 or so years about how the private sector fits into it, how do business schools fit into it, and how can the business sector play a role in this. So I think it would be really great for them to hear your story and about really how you began the Mekong Club and you know how you continue to do this work.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that question. You know, much of my pedigree related to this topic was working for USAID in Nepal and Bangladesh. In the early days, probably about 95% of my time was spent addressing sex trafficking, girls being forced into prostitution. It wasn't until I got to the United Nations in 2006 that I started to spend more time looking at forced labor, and at that time I was working with 6 governments in Southeast Asia: China, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar. And as part of that, we were working with governments, NGOs, we were collecting data. We really felt like we were making some kind of an impact until the numbers started to come in that helped us to get a general sense of the universe of people that were involved in modern slavery around the world. And at that time, the number was 21 million. It was the kind of ILO number that is often used around the world and continues to be used. And what we saw was 21 million people in slavery, and then we compared that with the Trafficking in Persons report that said that about 35,000 people around the world were actually being helped. Now, that was kind of a very, I don't know, sad moment for me when we put those two numbers together and we did the math and realized that we were helping about 0.1% of the people. And so we kind of scratched our heads and said, okay, well, what are we doing wrong, you know? So we went back to the numbers, and when we looked at them, we came to realize that out of the 21 million, 75% are in forced labor, and about 60% are associated with supply chains. So I started to think that perhaps what we needed to do was to talk to the private sector. So I had a contact who was in Hong Kong, and this woman was able to get me into high-level corporations to be able to talk to them, interview them, collect information from them about what they knew about human trafficking and, you know, what they thought needed to be done. And the interesting thing is when I started to go to Hong Kong, I came to realize that many of these people didn't make any connection at all to the fact that their business had anything to do with this. But immediately after hearing about it, they came to accept the fact that perhaps this is a business risk. But then the next step was for them to say, well, we don't know what to do now because we're not going to go to the UN or the NGOs because, frankly, we don't trust you. You know, we have to protect our business. You could potentially name and shame us, et cetera, et cetera. So gradually over time, what happened was private sector individuals started to say, well, wait a minute, shouldn't the private sector be addressing this issue? The private sector knows bad business. They know how to address issues that they come in contact with. Why not have the private sector address this? So the Mekong Club was made up of individuals from major corporations that said, okay, let's unite together, offer a safe space that would allow for corporations to be able to sit down with each other, talk about these issues, come up with private sector solutions, and then use this as a basis of being able to address the problem. So, for example, the banking working group that we worked with came up with the idea that they felt like having training at all different levels for the banking community was necessary. The retail group said that we want training too, but we want it to be online, kind of an e-learning format, and we want it to be set up in such a way that we have short films that will allow us to be able to get a particular subject matter without having to watch a 45-minute film. So something on definitions, something on statistics, something on the relationship with the private sector, and to have that available in multiple languages so they could give it to their staff. And so we're in the process of putting that in place. The manufacturing group was interested in identifying tools and methodologies that would allow for people who are buying materials around the world to identify potential risk. And so we're in the process of putting something like that in place. So once the private sector kind of sits down and decides that this is what they want to get involved with, they're quite active in the process of identifying what they think needs to be done. And the other thing that I just want to kind of clarify, and this was a misconception that I myself had prior to working with the private sector, was people kept saying over and over again that private sector doesn't care. They're only concerned with profits and growth and prestige, and it will never get involved in this. That's not been the case. You know, I find many private sector people who are very interested in this topic, want to get involved, want to step up, want to find a place to be able to use their skills to address it. You know, I'm just hoping that, you know, we can find a way of opening up that door to allow for a lot more of that goodwill to be translated into action, because I really do feel like that's going to be one of the major breakthroughs that's going to allow us to really make a difference.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that, sharing your story and your journey. And I know that everyone on the call really appreciates hearing how you began your work in this. So thank you for that. And I have a question that I think can go to, it was directed to Greg, but I actually think it would be really interesting to hear from you, Matt, too, about this. So we'll go to Greg first, and then back to you, Matt. What do you think is the best way for NGOs to approach the private sector for a successful collaboration? I think that, you know, Matt, you really spoke to the idea that, you know, we are still creating this safe space, and that we've had this naming and shaming, and you know, that we really need to go away from that. We really need to, you know, start these conversations and have these conversations. And I know that, you know, I've been an advocate for that, as have others in the field, when we're talking about engaging you know, the business sector. The work that I'm doing with the World Economic Forum and the initiative that we started to engage the private sector is all about you know, not just focusing on the naming and shaming, and you know, what is the role where we can really have a constructive dialogue. So I think that it would be great for the audience to hear about what you think would be you know, a way and a direction and ideas for, you know, if there's an NGO, and I know there are a number of NGOs that are right now on this call, if they were thinking about engaging in a multi-sector approach, or, you know, a tri-level approach with civil society, government, private sector, et cetera, how would they begin that conversation, particularly with the private sector, based on your experiences? So Greg, I'll kick it to you first, and then Matt, if you could follow up.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. You know, I think a lot of my experience is kind of being in private sector, but having passion around some of these areas, and so I've actually you know, been fortunate to be part of organizations that had outlets for these types of things, and so it's my experience has kind of come from the other side. One thing I would say, though, from an NGO trying to come into the private sector, I think businesses today, you know, it's partially about data. So I think, you know, having the right data points, you know, I think, you know, Matt did a great job with his, you know, the data that he's got in his presentation. You know, I think so. Having the data point, and then I think the other thing that we've done, so with the PhotoDNA capability, that was, you know, that kind of came out of a hackathon a few years ago. We put it into the cloud as a cloud service. We actually give that away for free for companies. And so the way that we've done that is we created a business model around PhotoDNA and Content Moderator. Content Moderator is a paid service for you know, helping to you know, identify other policy violations that might be happening on a platform. So things around adult content that you may allow adult content, but you don't want it in the bucket under for you know, for where kids can't see it. So you need to know about it. You need to have those signals. PhotoDNA is part of that essentially package, and the way that we did that is we kind of put a business model together that allowed us to do PhotoDNA for free, but it's funded essentially by Content Moderators. So when we looked at you know, who cares about having this type of content on their platform, and who and which type of businesses are getting this content on their platforms, we said there's other things that they need. So can we figure out a way to make this work more long term, so that, you know, it's not a program that'll get shut down because it's just, you know, costing the company money. So we wanted to look at it in that perspective. Is like, what's, you know, kind of what's in it for, what other value can this capability add? So I think you know, it's kind of having that other lens from an NGO perspective is like, is there things that are going to also be valuable for the business that might help me get my foot in the door there. So, but I think that on the other side, it's really finding the people that are in that business that are also going to be passionate about that space, because they're going to be able to bring it from the inside out as well.
Thank you, Greg. Matt, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, there's an organization called Data Motivate out of the Philippines that basically takes women who have been in forced prostitution and then educates them up to be able to address tech issues. They're often women who would have gone on to college and so forth, but they got sidetracked, forced into the sex industry, and then they leave that, and then they get basically trained up to move forward with you know, a traditional business type of job, and it's quite inspirational because it demonstrates a sense of hope. One of the reason why I'm mentioning them is they're in the process of developing what I would describe a database that allows for corporations to identify people within their business who want to add value and NGOs that need it. So it's kind of a matchmaking service to allow for the talent and the skills that exist within the private sector to be kind of accessed by the NGO world. The types of things that corporations can offer is technical assistance related to IT issues, accounting, business design, strategy development. There's all kinds of things that are available, and if there was a mechanism that made that process easy, then you would find the possibility of more corporations being able to liaise with the NGO world. The other concept that we're kind of experimenting or thinking about here is finding a way to allow for corporations to adopt NGOs within the community, to see whether or not they can kind of figure out an organization that has the same value system as them, is interested in achieving a certain particular goal, and then developing a kind of a relationship that allows for that corporation to mentor and support the NGO, but to allow the NGOs to also mentor and support the corporation so that they can understand within the corporation what they need to know. So more of an equal partnership between the various organizations. You know, in the past, we haven't been able to move in that direction because there's been kind of tension between the NGO world and the corporate world. And much of what we're really trying to do is to help to ease that tension, develop a sense of trust between these various groups, and then see whether or not that will translate into, you know, a consortium of organizations working collectively on this issue to make a difference.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much to you both, Matt and Greg, for your comments on that. I just want to quickly get back to a question that actually came in that is something I probably should answer, which is related to the RESPECT initiative and the work that we may be possibly doing in Canada. We have recently started this as something in addition to the webinars. The webinars are a part of our efforts. But we will have a global perspective. So we would love to talk to you more about anything particular in Canada, whether it's engaging with certain corporations. We hope to have 4 key areas that we're going to be working on in addition to the webinars, including a web portal, a student case competition for MBA, public policy, and law schools, and also doing a stakeholder needs assessment. So for the audience member who posed that question, you know, we'd love to talk to you more about getting more of those companies and organizations in Canada involved, because we do truly want this to be a global effort. So I want to get to a question, and this will probably be our next to last question. If anyone has any final questions that you would like to ask, burning questions for our speakers, please do send them into the text chat box. And if not, we can feed them out after to the presenters to answer if we didn't get to them during this time before we go to closing comments. So there's a question specifically about supply chains. I know we did a whole webinar series specifically on supply chains last year, but this one is actually interesting because the question is involving technology. And I know that some multinational brands and tech companies are looking specifically at supply chains. We actually do have somebody from HP who's on the line who's joined, and I just want to give a shout out to my colleague Steve Simsky who's here. Thank you for joining us. I know you're traveling, and I really appreciate it. HP actually just got an award for their work on supply chains from Thomson Reuters in the fight against slavery. And so that's just one example of a technology company that's addressing this from a supply chain angle. And I know, Matt, you're doing, obviously, this work with a number of companies, and Greg, this is, something that you've probably discussed at Microsoft, even though, the focus is more on creating these technologies. So the question is, can we map how forced labor and other forms of modern slavery how forced labor is being infiltrated in supply chains using technology? I know that we have a number of apps out there. The app that you're doing, does address some of that, Matt. But do you see successful ways where this is being done, where supply chains are being mapped, whether it's through corporations, whether it's through NGOs or other civil society partners using the power of technology? And I pose this to both of you, really, because I think you both have thoughts on this. So, Greg, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think so there are certainly Microsoft has a supply chain. There's certainly efforts here as well to understand and make sure that we're not working with organizations that are supporting trafficking or slavery, and so that's definitely something that Microsoft's working to do and committed to doing. I think technology definitely can have a big impact there, and I think some of the things like that Matt's working on. I think there's ways to leverage some of that data when it comes to from a technology perspective. I think in a lot of cases, I think there's just an unknown, where companies just don't know and people don't know, and so I think we have to get the data to the people so that they can essentially vote with their and help the companies decide if they're not going to side with their dollars and with their purchases. And so having the ability for the people to know like which back end or which suppliers are actually using slave labor. I think that's a huge thing to get in front of the public so that we can make educated decisions about who we want to support and which companies we want to support there. And technology can help that. I think it's really about distributing that information from a technology perspective and getting it accessible to whether it's different apps that want to use it so that you can have an app that you can scan a barcode and it shows up in something like that. But I think there's definitely opportunities from a technology perspective to get this more into the forefront.
Thank you, Greg. Matt, do you want to follow on that?
Yeah, there's kind of a prerequisite step that has to happen before technology can be used to be able to address this, and that is many of the organizations that have extensive supply chains have to kind of be a little bit more assertive when it comes to saying, okay, we get the fact that the legislation is saying that we have to go all the way down to Tier 2 and 3, and we have to move beyond just looking at Tier 1 to have that take place. Now, just to look at the private sector manufacturing in general, for many years, they would look at Tier 1, which is where items are being assembled, and they would go ahead and audit that, and those audits were very much a part of what organizations were doing for many years. And they also included forced labor questions and so forth in that. So it's not as if the private sector hasn't been doing things. It's just recently, though, that the expectation is that they have to go to the second tier, which is where the component parts comes from, and the third tier, where the raw materials comes forward, to look at those various levels. A lot of corporations don't really even know how to go about doing that. And when they stop and think about the number of units that they'll have to audit, it just seems daunting and overwhelming. And so a lot of multinational corporations are struggling with what's the process and procedure to be able to do this. I think ultimately what will happen is corporations will realize that there's a great added advantage to working together, to sharing audit information, and also identifying resources that will allow for smart tech companies to come in and do the traceability and the auditing mechanism development that's needed that would allow for technology to take place. Once those resources are available, once the commitment is there, I think you will see very quick successes. And, you know, there are examples, I don't have time to go into this, where corporations have already hired organizations to go and develop these types of things. And so I think the process has already started. But the big challenge now is to allow for organizations to kind of get around the fact that now the expectation is that you go all the way down to the lowest level. And I'll give one more example related to that. Philip Morris made the determination that they wanted to go all the way down to the lowest farm level. And they've been doing that for quite some time. And what they came to realize was initially they thought this would be, you know, a lot of work and, you know, it wouldn't necessarily result in things. But after they did it, they came to realize, wow, you know, now we understand the entire business from the CEO down to the lowest level. Prior to that, we didn't understand what was happening down in the supply chain at that level. So it offered the possibilities of efficiencies, improvements in quality, opportunities to identify other suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. So it became a very positive thing. So I think as corporations go deeper into their supply chains, they'll have the same kind of recognition that this is a good thing and that they can learn things that go beyond forced labor that allow them to improve their overall business.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for providing those comments. And now I know we're approaching the top of the hour and the end of our time. It's really flown by, and we've had such a dynamic conversation. I really want to thank the audience and everyone for contributing their thoughts and feedback on this. So now I want to go to closing comments with our speakers. So Greg, we'll start with you with final thoughts on today's conversation and the theme of multinational technology brands and combating human trafficking.
Yeah, thanks, Christina, for this opportunity to speak to this community and this webinar, and thanks for the other speakers, or for Matt, I guess, the other speaker. It's been a great opportunity, and I think I would say, you know, from a parting words perspective, I'm encouraged by the amount of visibility that trafficking is getting recently. I'm encouraged by the partnerships that technology companies have across the industry in terms of, this isn't a secret sauce, or this isn't, a one company is going to solve this. Companies have to come together, and we have to come together with NGOs, the ones that are on the ground, the ones that are, passionate and have the strategies in place to solve these. I think technology companies have to come together with them, and I'm encouraged by that happening today. I think we see a lot of that. I get to see a lot of that, and so I think the future's going to have some good things happening to it when we look at sex trafficking and human trafficking in general. So thank you for the opportunity, and have a great day.
Thank you, Greg. And I also want to thank you too for mentioning the testimony by Ashton Kutcher and Thorne from the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations at the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week. If anyone has not seen that or seen the whole proceedings, I really encourage you to check that out. It was really an inspirational speaking session, and I think that you'll find it incredibly valuable in terms of the work that Ashton mentions, and also the other speakers in the conversation. So do go and check that out. And Greg, again, thank you for the extraordinary work that you're doing at Microsoft and really helping to save lives with the technology that you're creating. Thank you for joining us today. And now I want to go back to Matt. Matt, closing comments.
Let me just thank Greg for his comment. I support everything he said. I'll just add a few additional things to that. You know, when it comes to the data related to human trafficking, it really hasn't been up to par to help us to understand what we need to know in order to make a difference. And so I would put a very strong emphasis on us finding a way of identifying a standardized data collection mechanism to allow for some of the talented organizations like Palantir that are out there that are able to visualize what that data says, and then to see that that data comes back to the counter-trafficking world for us to be able to do our work more efficiently. I think kind of general awareness of the issue continues to be less than satisfactory. I did a presentation across the United States, 70 days, 27 cities, 114 presentations. About 70% of them were to corporations. And I came to feel that many organizations are using information that is quite old, that is not up to date. And I think that we have to make sure that we bring people to the awareness of where we are right now. With what's happening. There's a lot of changes going on with legislation, with organizations getting involved, and so forth. The third thing is basic collaboration. And the days of thinking that the NGOs and the UN and the governments are going to be able to solve a problem like this by ourselves are over. It's just not going to happen. We need collaboration among those groups in the corporate sector. And if we were really able to tap into the talents and the skills that the corporate sector has, we would really be able to change the world and have a significant impact. And so, you know, I mean, I think that what we're dealing with here is an atrocity, a horrific thing that when you stop and listen to the stories is amazingly important that we address this. And if we have 45.8 million people in situations like this, every day those people wake up and say, where's the world? Why am I in this situation? Who's going to help us? And we collectively have to be able to answer that question. And that's only going to happen if we have a united front. We work with each other, we combine our efforts, and then we use the best of what we have, and that's really going to make the difference. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It's actually 1 o'clock in the morning here, so I'm beginning to fade a little bit. My apologies if I basically misspoke a few times. It's been a long day here. Thank you very much.
Matt, I want to commend you for sticking with us till 1 a.m. and agreeing to do this. And I know also Greg is participating very early in the morning on the West Coast here in the U.S. So both of you are coming from difficult time zones to do this. So I just want to thank you for sticking with us, and also our scheduling and speaker changes with the program. You've both done an extraordinary job in outlining all of the different issues and emerging technologies and issues surrounding the corporate sector and how we can engage more and make this better for our anti-trafficking movement as we go in to the next wave of change making. I also want to highlight too that an organization that Matt mentioned, I actually have been reading about it and researching it, and as of just last night, Data Motivate. I also encourage the audience to check out that organization as well. They're doing some really interesting things by employing survivors of human trafficking in terms of the work that they're doing, and it's a really, really interesting company. So I encourage you to check that out as well. So thank you to our audience for sticking with us for 2 hours, for your time and your questions and your feedback. We've had such great questions, and it's been really amazing. And I just want to make an announcement that we're going to be having our next webinar in our New Technologies, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship series, Combating Human Trafficking, and it's going to be focused on entrepreneurship, promising practices of innovative entrepreneurship for startups to combat human trafficking. I know I'm really looking forward to that conversation coming from Babson College, and that'll be on Thursday, March 30th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Time or 4 to 6 p.m. Central European Time. So do sign up for that. I've been sending out the The web addresses for my website, www.babson.edu/IHTMS, and the Global Initiative, www.globalinitiative.net, where you can sign up to register for this conversation as well as the other webinars in our series. So again, thank you for joining us. I also want to thank our technical team, John Florendo and Zach, who's here with me, for leading the charge in the technical side of things today. Thank you for your great work. And again, thank you to our partners and co-sponsors and the Global Initiative, International Organization for Migration, Dentons, and the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center for being with us in this series. So thank you, and I look forward to talking with you next time. Have a great rest of the day and evening. Bye-bye.